All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty big challenge in the world of LLMs. It's this whole thing about handling really, really long texts,
Yeah, that's a huge one. It's like, how do you get an LLM to understand a whole book or even more?
right? Think about it. Like, usually LLMs work with these like chunks of text. It's kind of like reading a page at a time, right? But what if you need to, I don't know, analyze a whole library or something?
Well, exactly. And it's not even just about shoving more information into the LLM. The real trick is, can it actually make sense of it all, right? Can it connect the dots?
Totally. And that's what we're going to be digging into today. We've got this stack of research papers, and there's this one that's particularly interesting. It's called InfiniRetri. And
Oh, yeah, InfiniRetri. I think that one really flipping the script on how we're thinking about this problem.
yeah, how so?
Well, most approaches right now are all about making the LLM's memory bigger or trying to like squash the information down so it fits. But in InfiniRetri, it takes a different approach. It actually uses the LLM's existing attention mechanism to figure out what's important.
So instead of like upgrading the LLM's RAM, we're teaching it to be a better note taker. I kind of like that.
It's a good way to put it. It's all about efficiency.
So how does that even work? Like, how does attention help with handling these massive amounts of text?
So there's this idea in the paper that the way LLMs pay attention is very similar to how retrieval systems work, the things that search for information.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
Like, imagine you're reading a book, but you have a specific question in mind. You're not going to read every single word. You're going to scan. You're going to look for the parts that are relevant to your question.
You're basically using your question as a filter.
Exactly. And InfiniRetri is built on the idea that LLMs can do something similar. It basically leverages that focusing ability of the attention mechanism. It's like the LLM is highlighting the important parts as it goes.
So the LLM is like reading with a purpose. Like it's actually trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to remember here?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And what's really interesting is that the researchers found that this ability to focus, it emerges naturally during the LLM's processing. As you get closer and closer to the output layer, the more targeted the attention becomes.
So it's not just randomly paying attention to stuff, it's actually becoming more selective as it goes.
Right, and InfiniRetri takes advantage of that. It grabs those highlighted sections, the things the LM is really focused on, and stores them in a cache.
Okay, so it's kind of like keeping track of the key takeaways, the Cliff's Notes version as it goes along.
Exactly. And those notes, or cached sections, are then ready to be used when the LLM moves on to the next part of the text.
Okay, I'm starting to see the big picture here. So we're basically breaking down the text like you break down a giant encyclopedia into smaller, more manageable volumes. And then the LLM, as it reads each volume, is taking notes on the key points and storing them in its memory banks.
That's a great analogy, and it keeps doing that, constantly updating its notes as it goes, even when you're dealing with a practically infinite amount of text.
So it's kind of like a dynamic summary that's always evolving.
Precisely, and that's what allows InfiniRetri to navigate these really complex, long texts.
So let's walk through this a little more. How does this whole process actually work in practice? Like if I hand InfiniRetri a giant research paper, what happens step by step?
Okay, so let's say you have this massive research paper. First thing InfiniRetri does is it breaks it down into chunks. It's kind of like chapters in a book.
Makes sense. You wouldn't try to read a whole dictionary at once.
Exactly. So it takes the current chunk and then it does something really interesting. It actually combines that chunk with information from the previous chunks. This is where those notes, the cached information, comes into play.
So it's like it's constantly referring back to its notes, making sure it's connecting the dots.
Yeah, exactly. And then here's the cool part. The LLM processes this combined chunk of information using its normal attention mechanism.
No retraining needed or anything.
Yep. It's using the same attention mechanism it always uses.
So the LLM is looking at this combined chunk with the notes from earlier, and its attention is going, okay, this part and this part over here, these seem really important. Let's focus on those.
Right. And now comes the really clever part. In InfiniRetri, it doesn't just cache individual words or tokens, it caches entire sentences that contain those important tokens.
Sentences. Why sentences? Why not just the important keywords?
Because sentences give you context. It's like instead of just highlighting a word in a book, you're highlighting the whole sentence so you understand the full meaning. It's about preserving the meaning, not just grabbing random pieces of information.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about memorizing facts. It's about understanding the bigger picture.
Exactly. And then those cached sentences, they're ready to be combined with the next chunk of text and the whole process repeats.
So it's constantly building on what it's learned, kind of like a rolling snowball of understanding.
That's a great way to put it. It's a really elegant approach to handling these massive amounts of text.
Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but does InfiniRetri actually work? Like, does it hold up in the real world?
Well, the researchers put it to the test. They ran it through a bunch of benchmarks, this whole suite called Long Bench, that's specifically designed to see how well models handle long context tasks.
So they weren't messing around. They really wanted to see if it could walk the
Oh
walk.
yeah, they put it through the ringer, and one of the tests that really stood out was this thing called Needle-In-a-Haystack. It's basically like it sounds. You've got this huge document, and the model has to find a specific sentence hidden in there.
Sounds tough.
It is. And in InfiniRetri, it got a perfect score, 100% accuracy, even when the document had a million tokens.
A million tokens. That's insane. That's like finding a needle in an actual haystack.
It really is, and it just shows how powerful this idea of using attention for retrieval can be.
But it's not just about finding needles, right? Like, what about more complex tasks where you have to actually understand the information?
Yeah, that's a great point. So they also tested InfiniRetri on these multi-document question answering tasks. These are really challenging because the model have to go through multiple documents, figure out how they're related, and then synthesize all that information to answer a question.
Like a research paper on steroids.
Right. And on one of these benchmarks, Hot Pot QA, InfiniRetri just blew the competition out of the water. It got like a 288% improvement over the traditional methods.
Wait, 288%? That's not even an improvement. It's like a whole different league.
It is, and what's really driving those results is this combination of the LLM's natural ability to focus on the right information and InfiniRetri's really clever way of caching and managing that information.
So it's not just about brute force, it's about strategy.
Exactly. It's like having a really efficient research assistant who knows exactly where to look and what to pull out.
It's like giving the LLM a superpower, the ability to handle these massive amounts of text without breaking a sweat.
It's pretty close. And what's even more exciting is that all of this, the accuracy, the efficiency, it's all happening without increasing the size of the model.
So no need for these gigantic, power-hungry LLMs.
Right. InfiniRetri is showing that we can do a lot with the models we already have. It's just about using them smarter.
That's really encouraging. It means we don't have to just keep throwing more computing power at these problems.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Okay, so InfiniRetri sounds like a game changer, but is there anything it can't do? Are there any limitations?
Well, there's one area where it's not quite as strong, and that's long document summarization.
Really? I thought the whole point was to help LLMs understand these huge amounts of text. Wouldn't that make them better at summarizing?
You'd think so, right? But there's actually a subtle difference between being able to identify the most important information and actually creating a good summary.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it this way. You can highlight all the key sentences in a textbook, but that doesn't mean you can write a good essay about the subject.
Ah, so it's like I've got all the ingredients, but I don't know how to bake the cake.
That's a great analogy. Summarization requires a more holistic understanding. You have to connect the dots, see the bigger picture. And while InfiniRetri is fantastic at zeroing in on the key points, it seems like it might be missing some of those subtle connections.
So it's a trade-off then. Super efficient at finding information, but not quite there yet when it comes to the more nuanced tasks like summarization.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. And this actually highlights an interesting area for future research, like how can we adapt InfiniRetri or maybe even build on it to make it better at those more holistic tasks?
So even with this limitation, it sounds like InfiniRetri is a big step forward.
It definitely is. It challenges this idea that the only way to solve the long context problem is to just keep scaling up model size.
It's like maybe we don't need a bigger brain, we just need to learn how to use the one we have more effectively.
Exactly. And that's a really exciting direction for the field. It suggests that there's a lot of untapped potential within these LLMs. And maybe the key is to focus more on those internal mechanisms like attention instead of just brute force scaling.
So it's a call for more finesse, more elegance in our approach to LM development.
Yes, and it underscores that we're really just at the beginning of this journey. There's so much more to discover, and InfiniRetri is a really exciting glimpse of what might be
It
possible.
really makes you wonder, like, what else are we missing? What are the potential is hidden in these models?
That's what I find so exciting about this kind of research. It really opens up all these new ways of thinking about LMs. We tend to focus on size, on making these models bigger and bigger.
Right? It's all about scale.
But InfiniRetri is showing us that maybe there's a different path. Maybe it's not just about size. Maybe it's about understanding how these models work on a deeper level and then figuring out how to leverage those internal mechanisms.
So like we've been so focused on building a bigger engine that we've kind of ignored the transmission. We haven't really optimized how the power gets delivered.
Exactly. And InfiniRetri highlights the importance of that transmission, so to speak, especially the attention mechanism. It's showing that we can get these massive performance gains without having to constantly scale up the model size.
It's about being more strategic, more efficient.
And it really underscores that we're just at the beginning of this whole LLM journey. There's so much more to explore, and InfiniRetri is just a little taste of what might be possible.
It's like we've just scratched the surface.
Right. And it begs the question, what other capabilities are we overlooking? What else can these models do if we just figure out the right way to unlock their potential?
It's a pretty exciting time to be in this field.
It really is. And it's not just about the technical stuff either. Think about the implications. Like, imagine a world where anyone can understand these really complex documents, like scientific papers or legal documents.
Or even just like Gent's historical texts or something.
Exactly. It could really democratize knowledge, make it accessible to everyone.
That's a really compelling vision. So for our listeners out there, what are the big takeaways from our deep dive into InfiniRetri? What should they be thinking about as they go about their day?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is to really challenge our assumptions about LLMs. We tend to think of them as these massive data-hungry machines, but InfiniRetri shows us that there's a lot more nuance there.
It's not just about brute force, it's about understanding the intricacies.
Right. And the attention mechanism, that's really key. InfiniRetri demonstrates just how powerful that mechanism can be if we learn how to use it effectively. So I think the message here is don't underestimate the potential of these models.
And don't be afraid to think outside the box, to explore different approaches.
Exactly. There's so much more to discover, and InfiniRetri is a great example of that. So yeah, keep exploring, keep pushing the boundaries. Who knows what amazing things we'll find.
Well said. That's a great note to end on. This has been another fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. I'll next time.
This is the deep dive signing off.